Hey, my name is Richard Shell. I'm a professor at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. And it's really great to be on the Jesse T Show. So catch me there.
Richard Shell, welcome to the Jesse T Show, brother.
Thanks, Jesse. Really delighted to be here with you.
I know I'm excited to have this conversation. It reminded me I was driving with my kids, and we were having like our intro call and all the things that you have experienced in your life and the different things that you've had to work through and overcome to be able to kind of get to where you're at were very interesting to me. And I wanted to share your story with the world. So if you could just tell a little bit more about who you are and what brought you to today.
Sure. Thank you. Um, it's a long story. I'll make it short or shorter. Um, so in terms, I think it's interesting in terms of your audience. I teach entrepreneurs. I teach people. I've had in my executive classes. I've taught members of SEAL Team 6. I've taught UN diplomats. I've taught entrepreneurs and people who are starting their third, fourth, fifth companies. I teach negotiation and persuasion and influence, and also a topic related to what I hope we'll talk about today is a course on success, the meaning of success. I think success is a word that people get befuddled by. They have a feeling that they are chasing it and that they want more of it, but they never stop to ask themselves what it actually is that they're chasing. And they generally have some sort of view of fame, fortune, celebrity, having a big profile, being an influencer, somebody that has many followers these days, that sort of thing. And maybe that's what it is for them. But my job, I see my job as someone who facilitates introspection about that so that we can think about whether or not we're trying to achieve the right goals before we go about learning all the technology of how to achieve goals. So I really have my academic and my professional and teaching calling is to both help people discover the right goals for themselves, and then secondly, give them tools to achieve those goals using influence, persuasion, negotiation, and the general technology of achievement like goal setting and stuff like that. I came to this the long way. I started my job at Wharton as an assistant professor at 37, which is about somewhere around 15 years late to what academic people usually do. And the route to getting there was many turns, twists, and falls. I was a Marine brat, Marine junior. My dad was a general in the Marines. My mom's dad was in the Navy. My dad's father was in the Army. My sister married a naval officer. I was all set to go to West Point or Annapolis. It was just which one was the big decision. My dad was actually the superintendent of the Virginia Military Institute, VMI, when I was in sixth grade. So he retired to do that. So you can just see it was all military all the time. I grew up in Hawaii when my dad was commanding general at Kaneohe Day in Hawaii. And I can just remember waking up and looking out the back door of our house and watching Marines landing in landing vehicles, practicing beach landings and leaving hundreds and hundreds of shells in their wake that were the blanks that were firing into the simulation. And I'd go down and collect all the shells and make, like little bracelets and stuff out of them. So that was my starter kit. But then I managed to negotiate my way into a Navy scholarship. Instead of going to Annapolis, I got a scholarship full ride at any university that had an ROTC program. So that was my first sort of step on my own. But once I got to where I was going in college, which happened to be Princeton University, I was captain of the drill squad, throwing my rifle around. And then the Vietnam War escalated. I'm, in my 70s, and that was my generation's challenge. And for the first time in my life, as a college student, I was called to actually come to grips with what I was being asked to do, which in my generation was to go to Vietnam and kill civilians and others that I had no quarrel with. And I couldn't bring myself to do it. And so that was a really significant break in my identity, because up to that time, I had just made working assumptions, unconscious assumptions about who I was and what I was called to do and where it all fit. And then all of a sudden, with really very little time to come to the understanding of why I felt the way I did, I had to take action on a whole new set of beliefs, and to resign my Navy scholarship, and to become a war resister, and to break with my family, and then try to figure out, what was next. And I'm sure you're familiar with this problem. When you don't know what your past is anymore, it's hard to be in the present, because there's no narrative thread that leads from the past to the present that's coherent. And when you don't have much of a present, it's impossible to imagine the future, because you don't have the through line that can take you from where you are to where you want to go next. And so it's like being a free floating molecule in space with no anchor. And
Which can be
that,
scary or fun depending on how you look at it.
with drugs, it might be fun. I don't
Yeah.
know, but I found it scary as heck.
Yeah.
And So that was the situation I found myself in at the age of 22. Um, and and so for the years between 22 and 37, it was a journey, really, of reintegrating myself and finding a purpose and a sense of self. And at the end of the day, from this perspective, from the distance of where I am looking back, I've told my students this, and really, this journey was as meaningful as any part of my life will ever be, I think. Um, and so I've drawn on it ever since, because I survived. And I think that the benefit of survival, if you're willing to face it squarely, as opposed to dodge it or duck it or try to get around it or defer it, the benefit of facing it squarely is wisdom.
Oh, for sure.
You learn the truth of suffering. You learn the reality of death. You learn the human condition, and the fact that you're no exception to it, and the pain of that realization. And then you, if you survive, are able to bring that back to the people who are at the cusp of that journey, or who have been deferring it, and help them navigate to more insight. And the journey principally for me was one of spiritual realization. But before I could get to that, I had to do a global seminar on world religions. And so I took 2 years and traveled around the world with a backpack, and made my way working where I needed to, and doing spiritual work when I had the opportunity. So I read the entire Bible from cover to cover while living in Israel, overlooking the Sea of Galilee,
Wow.
and working on a kibbutz
Oh,
for
yeah.
months. Yeah, it's a great way to live for free.
One of my best friends, he's from Haifa, and he was in a
Yep.
kibbutz, and
Yeah.
he's an amazing human being. But he was telling me about the community and
Yeah.
how it's very self-sustaining. It's very relational. It's a big family essentially.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. The babies all live in a house together.
Yeah.
Uh, and the and Haifa, that's like the San Francisco of the Middle East. That's a beautiful, beautiful city. But then I went on and went across land, overland, from Istanbul to New Delhi on something in those days we called the Magic Bus. It was a bus that left every day from Istanbul. It cost $35 one way to make the journey, but you could get off the bus anytime you wanted and get on the bus again whenever you wanted, because one left
Wow.
every day.
Wow.
So you could kind of take your time going across Asia when you're on the Magic Bus, because it's just like this string of buses. But it led me all the way from Turkey, across Iran, when you could do that, into Afghanistan.
Wow.
So I was in Afghanistan in the late 70s when the Soviets were there. And it hadn't changed any. For those of your listeners who are veterans and had duty in Vietnam, I've in my teaching subsequently have met many military people who had a tour there, or 2 or 3. And when I was there in the late 70s, it was the magic bus, stopped every 100 kilometers or so, and somebody with a gun got off the bus that was in the front with the driver, and a new person with a gun got on the bus at the chai house. And after a couple of these stops, I turned and asked somebody who looked like they knew more than me what was going on. And I said, "What's with the guys with the gun in front of the bus?" They said, "We're just crossing boundaries. They're warlords." And invisible boundaries. And the bus needed protection from each warlord going across. And whatever the toll had been paid to get across had been paid, because they didn't ask us to pay. So it was a pretty extreme sort of situation then, just as it is now. And I don't think the Taliban are going to have any more luck getting the warlords to play ball with them than anybody else has, from Alexander the Great to the Soviets to us. But anyway, the Afghan part of my story is actually important to me, because I reached the bottom of my life there. I landed in Kabul on a rainy day, late in the afternoon. I got off the magic bus. I tried to make my way to a youth hostel. I was stumbling. I felt very, very ill, and I actually blacked out in the middle of the street into a mud puddle. And I woke up with my backpack soaked and looking up at a circle of Afghans surrounding me and sort of looking down at me like I was a football in a huddle,
Yeah.
And I kind of came to, and a young Afghani boy reached his hand out and helped me stand up. And I stumbled on to my youth hostel destination. There was no room for me to have there. The only bed they had left was a cot in the middle of a hallway with a sheet around it. So I tried to clean myself. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, it's Christmas Eve. That's the day of the year. So here I am on Christmas Eve. I feel feverish. I'm stuck in the middle of a hallway with a sheet around me. And I'm wondering why I'm there and what's going on, and what's to become of me, all alone. And so that was it. That was the bottom. Princeton degree, general's son. Here I am alone in Afghanistan, in a strange place with barely a pillow to lay on, and I'm sick. I don't know what with. I found out the next day I had hepatitis.
Wow.
But into the midst of this darkness, 2 little faces popped their head around the curtain of my little area in the hallway. 2 like 17, 18-year-olds, a boy and a girl, a man and a woman. And they said, "Merry Christmas." And I said, "Wow, it is Christmas, isn't it?" And they brought a paper bag, and in the bag were 3 sugar cookies and 2 tangerines. And they left me their gift and a little literature on the cult they belong to. I don't know if you've ever been on the road, but that's sort of what it's like on the road. But I suddenly realized, as far down as I had fallen, I wasn't alone.
Yeah.
These 2 kids had come the same journey. They were Europeans. They had come almost as far as me, and they'd come to occupy the same space at the same time as me. And they were operating sufficient that they were giving gifts.
Wow.
And I was not operating. I was feeling sorry for myself. And I realized, what did they have that I didn't have? I was thinking that as I lay there eating my sugar cookie, being grateful. And what they had, even if it was sort of strange, was a sense of purpose. Even if they had bought into a belief system that I could never believe in, they had it, and that was powering them to do good work. And I was just all by myself and feeling sorry for myself, and I had no sense of purpose whatsoever. And so that was a turning point for me. I kind of realized, the goal here is not to just travel to another country. The goal is to find a sense of purpose.
Yep.
And so from then on, for the rest of the trip, it was this world religion seminars that kept going. And I just kept going, what are the experiences I can bring to myself that will help me understand what's going on inside myself? It's not about the mountains.
Powerful.
And so then I set about to do that. And when you're on the road in your 20s, you meet a lot of people coming the other way, and they will tell you when you say, what's a good opportunity to do spiritual work? And they'll say, well, you can go to Pune and you can do this. You go to Sri Lanka, you can do that. Because they've all been there and they've all heard the stories and whatnot. So I ended up in a Buddhist monastery in Sri Lanka eventually and stayed there. And that's where I found my path in. Buddhist meditation for me was the answer of the tool to investigate what was happening in there. And very rigorous, 18-hour days, meditate for an hour sitting, meditate for a half an hour walking, a small sugar cube in the morning, and then one meal before noon, and that was the food. And one 20-minute meeting with the Buddhist monk who took me on as his student. And I just came to a lot of insights and revelations there, and that gave me the sense of who I was, like what's really going on in there, and separate from the cascade of feelings and doubts and worries and emotions and fantasies and all those things. You acquire a point of view in Buddhist meditation that's very striking and different from identifying with all the stuff that's part of the stream of your consciousness. And so it's a long story and I won't keep going on it, but at the end I stopped at another Buddhist monastery in South Korea. I was invited to be a monk there by the Buddhist master, Zen master, and that kind of called the question for me about my vocation, because I could have stayed there. But I realized I hadn't reconciled my family. I'd left and not really healed that. And so I felt before I did anything dramatic with the rest of my life in terms of a meditation hall, I better go back and see who I was with my family. So I made my way back home. My dad and mom had retired by then. They were still living in Lexington, Virginia, which is where VMI is. And I showed up on their doorstep, having not spoken to them for quite a while, and they welcomed me home. And I lived in their basement for 2 more years. And I'd left a general and his wife, and I came home and got the great privilege to meet a mom and a dad.
Wow.
And so then eventually I had to get out of the basement. I mean, I was selling insulation door to door in Rutgers County. I was, 28 years old with my Princeton degrees. It wasn't really like looking like that was a sort of equilibrium that I was going to stay with. So I had an assessment of myself. And, I think this is a really good question for people to ask whenever they're at a transition point in their life in terms of what to do next. And I asked myself, well, what do I do better than most? And what I did better than most was write. I'm really good with words. And I'd majored in English and poetry in college, and I had great teachers at the time. And so I realized words was what I did better than most. And then I looked at the professions and I said, well, I could teach English. And so I called my brother-in-law who taught English at the University of Virginia and said, hey, I want to be an English professor. What do I have to do? And he said, you don't want to be an English professor. There are no jobs. And I thought, wow. So there it is, my big dream. And the guy who knows more than anything about this and who's training PhD students to do it is telling me, bad idea, because you don't want to spend 7 years on a PhD and then find yourself unemployed again. And so my plan B was law, also wordy. And so I went up the road to Charlottesville and went to the University of Virginia Law School. Luckily, I was able to get in. And then something happened the first day, about midway through the first semester. I was sitting in a contract class in a big law school classes are like these huge 150 people in the room. They're in an amphitheater style. It's electrifying in terms of the teaching and the way they do it. It's not just drone lecture. It's a lot of training you to be an advocate and think on your feet and all that stuff. And they model that. So here I was sitting in this classroom. I'm older than most of my classmates by about 5 years. And this teacher is up there and he's got us all on the edge of our seats, and I'm a big hand raiser, so my hand was in the air all the time. And I just had this feeling. It was like I floated above the classroom and I drifted across the room and I looked down on it and I said, I got it. I know what I want to do. I want to be that guy in the front of this classroom. And then that was it. I went, that combined so many things, because in addition to being good with words, I'd been an improvisational actor. I was a musician. I played in a rock band at Cypress. I played guitar. I was a performer. And part of that is performing. And I, it was from there on, I went to my law dean. I said, how do I get to be a professor of law? This looks good. And he said, we had this, and this. It was all very difficult and very, hard to do. And I said, great, that's what I'm going to do. And so I just set off from then to check all the boxes to be a professor of law. And I did it all. And then by the time it came time to actually be interviewing for jobs after doing all the things you're supposed to do, clerk for courts, write law review articles, be on the law review, which is an academic honor thing. It was, I had offers to teach from law schools, which is where I thought I was going, and the Wharton School of Business, which I'd never heard of. And the Wharton School has this legal studies group. And I interviewed, I loved it. I loved the people. I loved, the sense of, what was happening there. I went home to my wife, who I reconnected with, and we met in college, and luckily we found each other again, and we'd gotten married by that time, and said, big choice, what do you think? And she said, are you kidding? That's not a choice. The Wharton School is the best business school in the world. You're going to go there. My brother went there, and I went, really? Yeah. So that was the end of that choice. I always follow her directions. And so I went to the Wharton School, where I've been ever since. And the beauty of Wharton is you're around very smart people, but you get to mainly invent everything you do. Wow. And so I've invented a course on success. I've invented a course on negotiation. I've invented executive programs on negotiation. I've invented courses on responsibility, and found my voice and found a way to use my journey and experience in the classroom, and written 5 books, each of which is about a course that I've created. And I found my calling. And here's the capstone for this. I tell my students this. From my experience, life is an open book exam with 3 questions on it. And you get to change your answers as your life goes on. And the first question is, who am I? And the second question is, what am I going to do? And the third question is, who am I going to do it with? And if you can answer those 3 questions in any order that they come up, it doesn't have to be in that order. I happen to answer it, who am I? Who am I going to do it with? What am I going to do? But other people get to, what am I going to do? And then, who am I going to do it with? And then they finally find out who they are. But it's still, you got to answer all those 3 questions eventually, and you may change your answers as your life expands, and things happen that you don't expect, and setbacks occur, and opportunities arise. But that's really, in my mind, what it's all about. And anytime you're working on one of those 3 questions, I think I couldn't stand for anymore. I was a war resistor and a pacifist, and my dad was the superintendent of a military school sending people to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And so there was just this existential identity crisis, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I've never been through anything as painful as that. But I had no, as I perceived it, I had no choice. I had to put myself back together. I was Humpty Dumpty. I'd had a great fall, and I had to put myself together again. And there was no one else that could do it for me. And at the end of the day, I felt like I was a social worker. I was working in Washington D.C. in the poorest sections of town, helping families with condemned buildings where their homes for their children. Uh, and I just realized that I wasn't going to be able to do anything with my life until I could put together this sense of coherence that I'd lost. But I didn't know how it was going to work out. So I really made a burn your ships commitment. I just said, I'm leaving the country. I'm going to take my life savings, which at that time was $3,000, and I'm going to just not come home until I figure it out. And I was lucky enough not to have a family and not to have responsibilities that would make that decision impossible. But for me, it was just a kind of inner drive of desperation.
Was it something that was just brewing over time? Like, were you a rebel at heart? So you were looking at this almost, pun intended, military
No,
institute, and you're like, I want to be against the grain, or it was just something that
no.
was off in a line. You weren't in alignment.
I was totally out of alignment. I mean, looking back on it, since I've read the whole Bible and I know the stories in it pretty well, I felt a little bit more like Moses than Jesus. It was a moment where Moses is called for the burning bush. Even same thing happened to Jesus actually, and he said, "Really, Lord? Why me?" And even Jesus had his moment in the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, "Could the cup pass? I mean, is there a different way I could do this?" And for me, it was like that was it. I had no identity. I was waking up depressed. I was waking up looking out the window of my little apartment in Washington with the sun shining through the window, and I could watch a dust mote drift through that sunbeam until it disappeared. And that was all I could do.
Wow. So you were, yeah, it was just it was part of your journey, which led you to years later. Was it years later that you got into the monastery?
A couple of years
Yeah.
later. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that, because that's really important to the journey as well, in terms of finding your soul's purpose. And you said spirituality. What were some of the spiritual, I guess, modalities or practices you were learning through this journey? What were,
Yeah.
you talk about meditation, which I want to delve into the actual,
Yeah.
what you were doing, but what it was on top of meditation, after describing what you were doing there, what were some of these other spiritual experiences you had?
Well, I think it's a spiritual experience to sit on the hillside where Jesus preached the Beatitudes over the Sea of Galilee and read them, read the Sermon on the Mount, and try to understand it, and look at the Sea of Galilee and think, how could somebody walk on water out there? And think of the fishermen that were like Peter, who was just an average guy, and here comes this charismatic guy who's gone into the desert and found his calling, and said, "Come, follow me." And wow, what a surrender that is. And I think if you look at all these different ways that I was encountering the spiritual aspect of life, there is no more profound spiritual experience than sitting in a mosque, I don't think. As a place of worship, the mosque is got no representational art. There's no humans sitting around. It's just design. It's usually a very large open space with one little nook in one part that faces where Mecca, the direction of Mecca, wherever the mosque is. And it's just peaceful. And so sitting in a mosque in Istanbul was profoundly spiritual for me. And I'm thinking, what is this feeling? Um, do you have to go sit in the mosque to reproduce it? Um, and you can't live your life sitting on the hillside where the Sermon on the Mount was printed or was preached, or you encounter Jerusalem first for the only one time first, and then I had this. So I was picking up these traces, not knowing really that they were knitting together, until I hit rock bottom in Kabul. And that was when I went, oh, I've been seeing it all along, but I didn't really realize that was the direction you had to be looking. Because when you're in a mosque, you're still looking out.
Yes.
And when you're at the Sea of Galilee, you're still looking out. But all of a sudden I went, gosh, you got to look in. That's what's going on. and I was a Christian, sort of. You know about the military. On the military base, they have Christian, they have Jewish,
everything. Yeah.
But they don't. They, at least in my day, they didn't have 30 kinds of Christian. They kind of had Protestant and Catholic. And so it really wasn't a very deep indoctrination in any specific tradition of religion. It was just sort of religion once a week. And no one, I was taught to pray by my parents. But what I noticed about prayer, and this came to me as I began meditating in Buddhist meditation, and I think I had the beginner's luck. I knew nothing about any of this, and so I just encountered it all as a novice.
Yeah.
I didn't come with preconceptions. I wasn't looking for some revelation. I was just saying, somebody had said, you can go to this monastery, you can stay for free. There's, they've got wonderful teachers, and you can learn. And so I went, sounds good. I don't have any money now, and the prayer of the Christians and even the Jews, I'm not that familiar with the prayers of the Islamic tradition comparatively, but in general, they're asking for things. Please God, give me the strength to, or please God, deliver me from, or please God, something. And when I encountered Buddhist meditation, I kind of went, oh, this is not about asking for anything. You just sit and watch your breath and come back to your breath, and you realize what a mess you are inside. and it's sort of a given hour of meditation was this phantasmagoric of mixed up of pain in my leg, sexual fantasy, future fantasy,
Yep.
regret about the past, memory, feeling, pain in the leg, and as your attention just jumps and you try to get back to your breath from thing to thing, you realize, hey, this is just all happening all the time. I'm not aware of it, but that's actually what's going on in there.
Yes.
And it comes and it goes. So even the pain in my knees, which was tremendous because I'm a big guy and I was sitting in this very awkward position and it really hurt. And even the pain in the knees, I learned to control by shifting my attention back to my breath.
Yes.
And for the moment my breath was my attention, my knee didn't hurt because I wasn't paying attention to the pain. And so you sort of get a point of view about who you are that's separate from what's happening to you in your mind. And they talk about the five senses as a sort of origin point of perception. You've got, you smell things, you taste things, you feel things, you see things, you hear things. But in Buddhist meditation, I came to realize the mind is the sixth perception. It's independent of the senses in some ways. And it's also derivative. But as I kind of came to places where I could keep my attention on my breath and create some space, I began to experience just stillness.
Yep.
And that was the same feeling I had in the mosque, only it was my experience of sitting in a small room at a Buddhist monastery with no windows in Sri Lanka. So it was like reproducible at scale for me, you know. And then I could trace the dust motes again as I was walking, and I saw the dust motes going through sunbeams. But now I was really fascinated by them. It wasn't a sign of depression, it was a sign of focus.
Yes.
I could keep my attention on that dust mote all the way down. And I was actually with the dust mote, you know. It wasn't a sign of anything other than me and the world. And then the final chapter of my the real journey was one day at that monastery. We only got to talk for 20 minutes to my teacher, Venerable Sivali was his name, and I came to him after about 2 or 3 months and said, Venerable Sivali, really appreciate you letting me stay here, and it's just been a tremendous experience. But my knees are killing me. I feel like my whole meditation is nothing but pain, pain, pain. And I wonder if you have a book you could recommend on Buddhism that I could read, because I really don't know what's going on here. And he looked at me with these great compassionate eyes that he had, and he smiled and said, "This is good."
Yeah.
He said, "Meditate now, read later. And by the way, I have an assignment for you." He said, "Walk into the jungle behind the meditation center this afternoon and just take a walk and see what you see." And so I finished my lunch and I walked into the jungle, uh, and my mind was wide open, and I was asking myself, why does he want me to walk in here? And it was a beautiful day, but sunlight sort of drifting through the jungle leaves of the canopy. And I was looking at my feet, and I saw many, many things that were dead.
Mm.
Vegetation, a dead animal, some dead insects. And then coming out of all that death was the forest floor of life, the trees, living plants. And I kind of went, oh, that's what's going to happen to me.
Yep.
And it was like this book had been opened that had been written in code. And all of a sudden, just because of where I was and what was going on and the place I was in terms of my mental attention and patience, the code got decoded, and I just saw a very simple truth about what's the situation we're in, and I'm part of it. And you can't have life without death. And it sounds obvious, except when you really, really deeply experience that, it changes your life.
Yep.
And so I sat down on the forest floor under a tree, and I just wept. I was just I had just swamped with this feeling, and it wasn't grief or joy, or it was just an emotion, just this very strong feeling of just realization, and the tears came from that. And so the meditation, I still meditate. I know you do, and I don't do it in the way that brought these realizations, because I think you can meditate to relax, and you can meditate to sort of bring some focus. But to meditate to bring realization requires intensity, I think, and conditions where things are taken care of, and you don't have to provide for yourself very much, because it's kind of, you have a kind of schedule, of rhythm of what's going on. And there's no guarantee you'll get any realizations, even if you have those conditions. So, but it just was lucky for me that I did. And I guess my desire was so strong. My motivation was so strong. I just kept every day I'd wake up, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And it was just always in there. And so the drive was so strong that it drove me to that. And I'm lucky it did.
What a beautiful lesson, many lessons, but a big one was in surrender. And that was kind of a narrative, and looking inward versus looking outward. We have everything we need within, and depending on, what you believe in, from God, source, universe, whatever it is, having that, relationship, can
Yeah.
really greatly expand on that. And I think that, there's this divine feminine that I'm working through right now with just being present and just being in full surrender to the moment. Because we talked about before jumping on some of the things that I'm working on and working through. And, as a man, a lot of times we step into that divine masculine of doing and creating and performing. But a lot of times the moment calls for just being and just checking in and listening and being introspective and being that softness to that yin to the yang. And it's a beautiful way to be, man. If you can learn, and you had a really great experience. I had a similar one. I was in Peru in March a few months ago, and I was doing a few different ceremonies with different plant medicines. And on one of the ceremonies, I was working with San Pedro, which comes from a cactus, and it's the masculine, it's the grandfather cactus. And it gave me a beautiful insight, very similar to what you talked about the jungle floor being dead, which made you sad, but then you realize that's what creates life, and that's the circle of life. And I looked at something completely innocuous. It was a few pieces of corded wood that would be used for fire later on. And I looked at it, I was like, oh, it's a dead tree. It's just, and then I thought this beautiful, and it sounds so kind of trivial in the moment. It was so powerful when it happened, but this wood would still live on even after it was dead, because it would generate fire to give living beings heat. It could be used with its strength even after death to build structure, to create shelter for people in the form of, lumber or whatever it was. And it was just like this really beautiful twist on looking at something one way, where it was like, oh, that's sad because it's dead. But then it was like, how much beauty was there in death, and how much beauty was there knowing that it was the circle of life where we all return to where we came from. So beautiful insights, brother. And it led you to this journey that you're at today with being an author 5 times over and being a professor and making an impact. Talk a little bit about the journey of being an author and a couple of the books that you want to talk about.
Sure. I mean, as I said, most professors, especially at Ivy League schools, do research and write books, and then they teach because they have to. Yeah. And I am a teacher. That's my vocation. I write articles. I wrote articles in order to become tenured and secure my appointments. And then after that, I decided I'll create courses, and then it turned out write books about the courses. Because as I teach, I hear myself. There's a wonderful saying an English author once said, "How do I know what I think till I see what I say?" Wow. How do I know what I think till I see what I say? And I think a teacher is in the business of learning what they think when they pay attention to what they say. And when they're in a classroom with curious, smart, motivated students, the students are challenging you and the students are teaching you. And so from my point of view, this classroom is like my temple, and I'm trying to hold a service where we learn. And then this thing happens, and I come up with an idea of what a course might be about. I generally, my courses are kind of about words, and then I try to help define them and help my students define them, and then they help me define them. So this course on success, for example, I finally figured out that I really, had time and opportunity to create what I thought would be the perfect course for a senior in college to take before they graduated, which would address all the questions I had when I was in my 20s, but no one helped me figure them out. And so the course is, it's called The Literature of Success. But it sort of summarizes all these different books, some from Plato and The Death of Socrates, which is a wonderful and amazing story, to all the way up to the autobiography of Sonia Sotomayor, the current Supreme Court Justice, Latina woman. And it's a sort of, what does it mean, this word success? And they have to write a paper, and the final paper is, what is success for me, and how am I going to achieve it? And I make them put the year on the paper. So whatever year I'm teaching it, I say, what is my 2021 theory of success? And how am I going to achieve it? And then my hope is 10 years later, they'll reread it and go, what part of this did I get right? And what part of it now do I realize was a little off, or whatever? but in the course of that, after teaching it for 10 years, my students kept saying, well, what's your final paper, Professor Shell? And I kept saying, no, I'm the teacher. You write the papers. I finally thought, well, it's my turn. So I wrote this book, Springboard, Finding Your Personal Search for Success, launching your personal search for success. And in that book, the first half of the book is, what do I mean by success? And it's about the reader. It's not about me. I mean, I tell the little, like 2 paragraphs of the story you and I just went through, because the book is not about me, it's about the reader. And that's my motivation for writing it. And then so then I had these exercises, something called the 6 Lives exercise, which helps people identify values that they have about what the word means. And by the way, I have that 6 Lives exercise on my personal website, grichardshell.com, and it's free. People can just go 6 Lives exercise. They could even Google 6 Lives exercise and they would find it. Beautiful. And the second chapter has, well, what about this goal? Fame. What about this goal? Fortune. What about this goal? Meaningful work. And so you get a chance to sort of play a design your life exercise in your mind as you go through the exercises, and which is what we do in the class. And then the second half is, okay, well, assuming you have some thoughts about what you mean by the word success, then how are you going to achieve it? And the second half is more conventional book about setting goals, setting the right kinds of goals, getting help, making sure you partner with other people and work, with people that complement your skills and love you and support you, and the parts of it that make it sustainable. And so that book, I've then gone on with that material. I have a course on Coursera called Success, which has reached about 100,000 people. And the 6 Lives exercise is part of that. And they have to write a little essay at the end. But it was a wonderful moment for me creating the Coursera class online, just a course, because I was terrified. I teach this course almost like a seminar. There are 35 students. We sit in a circle. How am I going to teach this to a group of people that I don't even see, and I don't even know who they are? And we started the filming for it because Coursera classes are like, about 8 hours of lecture in the little 10-minute bits. And we started in a classroom downstairs in the Wharton building, and it was this great big empty classroom, and they put all this light fixtures up for the production unit and everything. And I was totally feeling artificial and staged and subconscious. And as luck would have it, luck is an interesting concept in and of itself, but as luck would have it, it was summer and they were drilling in the classroom above us. And so every now and then there'd be this hydraulic drill that would interrupt the filming. And I finally said, this isn't working. They said, no, it's not. And I said, we have to find another place to do it. And they said, well, either that or we wait until the drilling's over. And I said, look, how about this? Let's go to my office. You set this up in my office, and let's do it there. And we went up to my office, not very big, but there was enough room for them to set the camera up. And there was the producer and the videographer and me and the film and the camera. And I realized, I went, holy smoke, I know what I'm doing now. I'm having office hours. And this producer is my student. And so I videoed this whole sequence of lectures in my office, just as if I were talking, as I do, to real people in one-on-one settings. And it was, in inspired moments, that filming. And the stuff came out, I said stuff that I'd never said before in a way that I'd never said it about this subject I'm very passionate about helping people with. And so, on Coursera, which is a huge platform with thousands of courses, that course, I'm identified across all Coursera as one of the top instructors on Coursera.
Wow.
Just because of that one course, just because those videos connect with people. And it was just another way for me to try to accomplish what I see now as my life's mission, which is, for the few days I have on the planet, try to have as many positive influences on the lives of others as I can.
It's a beautiful way to live. Like leaving people better than you found them, in the sense of, positive impact and meaningful conversation, and challenging when needed to challenge certain ideas or yourself. I mean, you even talked about like being a teachable teacher. I think that nothing teaches you better than this than being a parent, where I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old who's about to be 5, and they're my best teachers when they're with me. They teach me about patience, they teach me about intensity, they teach me about perspective, they teach me about love, and how they're just embodiment of love and energy.
It's there's nothing. I mean, I have my sons now. I have 2 sons. One is in about the same age I was when I started working at Wharton, and the other's about 7 years younger, in early 30s. And they keep challenging you, they keep teaching you. It never ends. And every now and then they come home and live with you, which is what's happened in my life. I mean, it's my life repeated. But here's the thing that I found most recently in that journey, that end of my journey. My oldest son just had his first child, little Mira, who's like 6 months old now. And watching an infant again when you're at my stage of the game, it was like, wow, pure consciousness. The infant mind, you see it just expanding by the second, and encountering the world and absorbing the world in a way that's just breathtaking.
It's incredible.
And so even an infant who does nothing but sort of poo, eat, and sleep, is this marvelous teacher about the state of consciousness that we all try to get back to.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it is.
There's different thoughts and beliefs, and you may have heard this before in your spiritual walk, that depending on your religious or spiritual beliefs, like the idea is that we came here for a specific experience, and the process of birth is so traumatic and so hard for our souls and our spirits that it like resets us to zero. Like, we don't remember the past, we don't remember our lives that we've had, and we start over in this pure state of being. There's no ego, there's no experiential ways of trauma. It's just, you're just alive, and like you said, poo, eat, and sleep. That's it. That's all you got to do.
It's disappointing if you're a parent, because you were looking forward to this great thing you're going to have, and it turns out it's like it's like a custodial activity.
I know. I used to joke around, and I used to say I prefer when right around month 6, between month 6 and on, is when I would really find my A game as a dad. But for the first few months, it was like
it's pretty hard. No sleeping. But I think whenever this is a rare interview for me, because mostly I end up on a podcast or giving a talk or something, and I'm talking about a subject, and how do you negotiate effectively? How do you stand up for your values against a bully and a boss in an office and stuff like that, which all, of course, requires you to have some self-awareness. So it's all connected. But one of the things that I think is very important for people to keep in mind along these dimensions that we've been talking about is not to get too panicky about, finding your purpose and finding your calling, and like there's some big 4-leaf clover out there, and every day you don't have it, it's like this loss problem, and you're all just panicked out of your mind because there's something there you're supposed to have and you don't have, and there's something wrong with you because you don't have it, and then you cycle back down into feeling like you're not good enough again. I think it's really important. I've come to think that, because my own life was mixed up with luck in a big way, and I think Wooden, the basketball coach, had it right. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
Yep.
And preparation is you have the mindset of a learner. Opportunity is what happens in front of you, but what happens in front of you, I think, is more like stepping stones in a river than it is like the discovery of a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And I always believe your progress in life is do the next thing that's better than what you're doing, that secures your requirements. So whatever responsibilities you have for financial security or for taking care of loved ones or whatever those are. That's job one. You have to take care of the people that depend on you. But then it's like, okay, I'm dissatisfied with what I'm doing now. And so what are the sources of my dissatisfaction? Well, I don't like this about my job. It's not calling on my talents that I have, and I have these other talents. Okay, so do a little work on your talents. Strength finder exercise, really good for that, that the Clifton people have. And think about what you do better than most. Like, that's my words thing. And then start interviewing people that are doing what you think is a perfect job. And go, like, call them up, get them on Zoom, just say, I'm on a sort of, investigation about what might be next in my life. Could you spare 20 minutes for me? And talk to them, because whoever's doing what it is you think is your dream job got there somehow. And they're just people, they're not like demigods. They're not people that have figured something out. They too have difficulties that they're struggling with. And make it real. And then incrementally, that gives you kind of a feeling of, well, maybe this part of this dream job is actually what I'm thinking about, as opposed to like that. And then just sort of try to arrange through your social network and through looking and applying for jobs and, investigating and interviewing and something better. Something that uses a little more of your talent, a little more of your mind, a little more of your passions. And don't let the perfect be the enemy of the better. And then just take that step. And then wherever you are, the next stepping stone will give you a new position to look at the field from. And you'll figure it out, like what you do well, what you don't do well, what you could do better. And then just keep doing that. And if you're lucky, and I was lucky at the age of 37 to find the Wharton School by accident. I didn't know what it was. It's a place where you get to teach undergraduates. I'd never dreamed of teaching undergraduates. I thought I gave up on that when it was no Shakespeare for me. And then you get the freedom to encounter other people smarter than you, that turn on little bulbs and think, what about that? I hadn't thought about that. And in my life, that was like the Positive Psychology Center at Wharton. Angela Duckworth, who wrote Grit, was a PhD student when I taught the first section of the success class, and she took it. So I had the benefit of working with Angela Duckworth for a whole semester when I didn't even know she was Angela Duckworth. And all I knew was that she was a hell of a lot smarter than me. And she brought all this psychology to the table that she was working on at the time. She was writing a thesis on grit then. And yeah, just luck, right? I got invited to a seminar. She was there. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to teach this new course." She said, "Can I come?" I said, "Sure." And so, there's a wonderful joke about marriage that has an analogy. And the joke, I think, was F. Scott Fitzgerald, the guy who wrote The Great Gatsby. He said, "Never marry for money. Just go where rich people live and fall in love."
Yeah.
And I think it's like, don't find a calling. Go to a place where a lot of people seem to have their calling and hang out.
Yeah. Through osmosis, you'll find it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll be influenced by them, and you'll pick up their energy and their mindset and that's sort of what the university has been for me as a former lawyer, for crying out loud. I went to law school, here I am talking about all this stuff. It's just because I found the right pond to be in, and I was willing to let it affect me to bring out my best. And if I hadn't done this, I think I probably would have been a minister. I think if I really found the thing I should be doing,
Yeah.
It just would have been on a much smaller scale, me doing what I'm doing. But also much less rich, because of the fact that I also get to teach, and I've met, amazing members of SEAL Team 6 and amazing members of the UN and all that, because I teach negotiation, and that's a self-awareness practice too. The best negotiators know themselves. So, I think it's do what's available next, and then take that as the sign that the universe is working, and then move in the direction of better. So I
Love it.
just thought I wanted to get that out there for relieve some of this anxiety that tends to arise around the what's my purpose and what's my calling. These words I don't think are all that helpful. There are a million purposes, and one will find you if
I
you
love
just
that.
do what you need to be doing. And there are a million callings, and they're not about the work. A calling comes from your attitude about the work. It's the person that has the calling. And the work doesn't have a calling. There are many, many spiritual ministers who are alcoholics and depressed people. And there are many, many people working, cleaning up stadiums in professional sports parks who have callings.
Yeah, that's beautiful, brother. That's a way to put the cherry on top of this conversation. But I definitely want to invite you back for future conversations more into the technical and the weeds of talking about negotiation or talking about success. You have such a vast richness of experience and ideas to be able to conversate on. So I'd like to be the first to say thank you from the audience. Thank you for your journey and for being vulnerable and courageous to share that journey. Thank you for who you are and the life that you've lived. And I look forward to our future conversations, brother.
Jesse, it's a real privilege to be with you, and congratulations on your work too.